You'll never make it to the top. Veronica said it with that smile she always wore when she thought she was being clever. The same smile she'd given me when she took credit for the Brennan account. The same one when she made sure I wasn't invited to the quarterly strategy meeting. My name's Logan Pierce. I'm 31 years old and I've been grinding at North Peak Financial in Manhattan for 7 years. Started as an analyst straight out of college, worked my way up to senior associate. I handle portfolio management for high net worth clients, the kind who don't blink at 7-figure investments. I'm good at what I do, maybe too good. Veronica Hale sat across from me in the conference room, her manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. She'd been at the firm for 5 years, came in as a lateral hire from some boutique firm in Connecticut, somehow managed to fast-track herself to senior associate within 18 months. She had the right connections, the right last name, and apparently the right willingness to step on anyone who got in her way. The partners are looking for leadership material, she continued, her voice carrying that condescending tone she reserved for people she considered beneath her. Someone who understands the bigger picture. I kept my expression neutral. We were discussing the promotion to vice president that had just opened up. The promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. The promotion she'd been angling for since the day she walked through those glass doors. I've brought in more revenue than anyone else in our division this quarter, I said quietly. Revenue is just numbers, Logan. The partners need someone they can trust in the boardroom, someone who fits the culture. There it was, the coded language that meant I didn't belong, that I wasn't one of them, that my middle-class background and state school education would always mark me as an outsider in their world of private clubs and inherited connections. I nodded slowly, like I was considering her words, like I agreed with her assessment. But something cold settled in my chest, a clarity I hadn't felt before. After the meeting, I walked back to my office and closed the door. I pulled up my client files, years of meticulous work and relationship building. The Brennan account alone was worth $12 million in assets under management. The Kowalski Trust brought in another 8. I'd built these relationships from nothing, earned every dollar of commission through late nights and careful strategy. I opened my laptop and started typing. An email to my biggest client, just checking in. Nothing unusual, just staying connected. But as I hit send, I noticed something odd. A notification on my screen showed that Veronica had accessed the Brennan files 20 minutes ago. Files she had no business looking at. I'd always been the type to keep my head down and do the work. Growing up in Buffalo, my dad drove a delivery truck for 32 years, never missed a day, never complained. He taught me that respect was earned through consistency and integrity. My mom worked nights at the hospital, came home tired, but never bitter. They sacrificed everything to send me to college. When I got to North Peak, I thought hard work would be enough. I thought if I just outperformed everyone else, the recognition would follow. For the first few years, it seemed to work. I made good money, got decent bonuses, even earned praise from the senior partners. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing the invisible barriers, the conversations that stopped when I entered a room, the client meetings I wasn't invited to, even when they involved my accounts, the way certain colleagues seemed to glide past obstacles that took me months to overcome. Veronica had arrived like a force of nature, confident, connected, ruthless. She had this way of making herself indispensable to the partners, always volunteering for high-profile projects, always available for after-hours drinks and weekend golf. Within 6 months, she was handling accounts that took other people years to access. I started paying closer attention to her methods, the way she'd position herself in meetings to take credit for collaborative work, how she'd subtly undermine colleagues by questioning their judgment in front of superiors, the way she collected information about everyone, storing it away like ammunition. 3 months ago, I discovered she was copying herself on my client communications. When I confronted her about it, she claimed it was for coordination purposes, said the partners wanted better oversight of all client relationships, but I checked with other associates. She wasn't copying herself on their emails. Last month, the Brennan account had generated a particularly large commission, a complex restructuring deal I'd negotiated over 6 weeks of careful relationship management. When the partners announced the quarterly results, Veronica somehow received equal credit for the success. She'd apparently provided strategic guidance on the deal structure. I'd found my name removed from the presentation slides. My analysis had been rebranded as collaborative work. When I asked my direct supervisor about it, he seemed genuinely confused, like the changes had been made above his head. The warning signs had been there for months, emails that went unanswered, meeting invitations that never arrived, client dinners where my attendance was suddenly not necessary. I'd rationalized each incident, told myself I was being paranoid. But sitting in that conference room, listening to Veronica explain why I'd never make it to the top, I finally understood. This wasn't about performance or qualifications. This was about control. She'd been systematically isolating me, positioning herself as my replacement. The game had been rigged from the start. I just hadn't realized I was playing it. The partners' meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. By Thursday morning, I knew I wasn't going to be in that room. The email came from senior partner James Whitmore at 9 a.m., short and direct. Logan, thanks for your continued dedication. We've decided to move forward with Veronica for the VP role. Your contributions to the firm remain valued. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and walked to the window. 43 floors below, Manhattan hummed with its usual chaos. People rushing to meetings, chasing deals, building careers. All of them believing that merit mattered. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was something deeper and colder, a complete understanding of how naive I'd been. I thought about calling my parents. My dad would tell me to keep working, that good things come to those who wait. My mom would ask if I'd been eating enough, if I was taking care of myself. They'd both assume this was temporary, a minor setback in an otherwise promising career. But I knew better now. This wasn't a setback. This was the system working exactly as designed. I spent the rest of Thursday going through my files. 7 years of work, hundreds of client relationships, millions of dollars in revenue generated, all of it about to be transferred to someone who'd spent more time playing politics than actually doing the job. That evening, I had drinks with my college roommate Kevin, who worked in compliance for a different firm. We met at a quiet bar in Midtown, away from the usual finance crowd. "You look like someone died," he said after I'd ordered my second whiskey. I told him about the promotion, about Veronica, about the systematic way I'd been pushed aside. Kevin listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding like he'd heard similar stories before. "You know what's funny?" I said finally. "She was right. I'll never make it to the top. Not at North Peak. So what are you going to do?" I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the bar's dim light. "I'm going to stop pretending this is about fairness." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning Veronica wants to play games. She's good at games. But she made one mistake." "What's that?" "She thinks I'm still playing by the rules." I finished my drink and left cash on the table. Kevin tried to ask more questions, but I was already moving past explanations, past justifications, past caring what anyone thought about what came next. The next morning, I walked into the office with absolute clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I knew exactly what Veronica had been hiding, and I knew exactly who would be most interested in hearing about it. She'd told me I'd never make it to the top. She was absolutely right. But she'd forgotten something important about people who have nothing left to lose. We stopped playing defense. The celebration dinner was at Le Bernardin, nothing but the best for North Peak's newest vice president. The partners had reserved a private dining room, complete with champagne service and a view of the Hudson River. I'd been invited as a courtesy, one last gesture before my inevitable fade into corporate irrelevance. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, watched as the partners filed in, shaking hands and making small talk about their weekend plans in the Hamptons. Veronica entered like royalty, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She worked the room with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and making promises about her vision for the department. "Logan," she said when she finally noticed me, "I'm so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. She studied my face, looking for signs of bitterness or defeat. When she didn't find them, her smile faltered slightly. I hope there are no hard feelings. The partners made their decision based on what's best for the firm. Of course, I said. You're exactly what they were looking for. The dinner proceeded as expected, speeches about leadership and vision, toasts to future success. Veronica accepted it all with gracious humility, the perfect picture of deserving achievement. During the main course, I excused myself and walked to the men's room, but instead of returning to the dining room, I made a phone call. Divorce attorney Marcus Hale speaking. Mr. Hale, my name is Logan Pierce. I work with your wife at North Peak Financial. There was a pause. Is everything all right? Has something happened to Veronica? Not exactly, but I think you should know that your wife has been having an affair with senior partner James Whitmore for about 8 months now. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. I'm sorry, who is this? Someone who cares about the truth. Check her credit card statements from the last 6 months. The Hotel Plaza charges every Tuesday afternoon. The jewelry from Cartier that she told you was a client gift. The weekend trips to Boston that were supposedly client meetings. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Why are you telling me this? Because your wife just destroyed my career. And because you deserve to know who you're married to. I hung up and returned to the dinner. Veronica was in the middle of another speech about teamwork and shared success. I waited until she finished, then stood and raised my glass. To Veronica, I said, may you get everything you deserve. She smiled and raised her own glass, missing the edge in my voice. The rest of the table joined the toast, unaware that I'd just lit a fuse that would burn down everything she'd built. After dinner, I pulled out an envelope and placed it next to her champagne glass. What's this? She asked. My resignation letter, effective immediately. Her eyes widened. Logan, you don't have to do this. We can work together. I'm sure we could have, but you were right about one thing. I'll never make it to the top, not here. I stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Veronica? You might want to check your phone. I think your husband's been trying to reach you. Her face went pale as she grabbed her purse and pulled out her phone. I could see the missed calls and text messages lighting up her screen. I walked out of Le Bernardin feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I could hear raised voices and the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, but I didn't look back. Phase 1 was complete. Veronica's personal life was about to implode, but that was just the beginning. Her professional destruction would require a more delicate touch. Good thing I'd spent the last 3 days preparing for exactly that. I spent Saturday morning in my apartment, organizing 7 years of documentation. Files I'd copied before turning in my company laptop. Email chains that told a very different story than the one Veronica had been selling to the partners. The affair with Whitmore was just the obvious transgression. What I'd discovered went much deeper. For the past 2 years, Veronica had been running a sophisticated scheme. She'd been steering high-net-worth clients toward specific investment products that generated unusually high fees. Products that happened to be managed by her former colleagues at her previous firm in Connecticut. In exchange, she received kickbacks disguised as consulting fees paid to a shell company she'd registered in Delaware. The Brennan account had been the perfect example. The strategic guidance she'd claimed credit for had actually involved pressuring me to recommend a series of hedge fund investments that generated massive commissions. When I'd resisted, suggesting more conservative options that better matched the client's risk profile, she'd gone around me directly to Whitmore. The pattern was consistent across multiple accounts, complex financial products that enriched Veronica and her co-conspirators while exposing clients to unnecessary risk. She'd been gambling with other people's money and pocketing the proceeds. I'd started noticing the irregularities months ago, but hadn't connected all the pieces until this week. Late nights spent cross-referencing trade confirmations with client statements, tracking money flows through corporate databases, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. Sunday evening, I made another phone call. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division. I'd like to report securities fraud at a registered investment advisor. The intake officer was professional but thorough. I provided Veronica's full name, her employer information, and a detailed summary of the kickback scheme. I explained that I had documentary evidence of the violations and was prepared to provide witness testimony. Can you email us the supporting documentation? Already prepared. You'll have everything within the hour. I spent Sunday night uploading files to the SEC's secure portal. Bank records showing the Delaware Shell Company. Email chains discussing the fee arrangements. Trade confirmations that demonstrated the pattern of unsuitable recommendations. Client statements showing the impact on portfolio performance. By Monday morning, I'd also contacted the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the New York State Attorney General's office. 3 separate investigations that would approach the case from different angles, making it impossible for North Peak to contain the damage through their usual political connections. But I wasn't finished. Corporate fraud investigations could take months or even years to develop. I needed something more immediate. Monday afternoon, I called Marcus Hale's law office. Mr. Hale, this is Logan Pierce. We spoke Friday evening. Mr. Pierce, I want to thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. You were absolutely right about my wife's activities. I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way. Actually, you may have saved me from something much worse. I've been reviewing our joint financial accounts and I've discovered some irregularities that concern me. Large cash deposits that don't match her reported income, investment accounts I wasn't aware of. I smiled. Marcus Hale was one of Manhattan's most aggressive divorce attorneys. If anyone could unravel Veronica's financial web, it would be him. That sounds like something you should discuss with her employer, I suggested. Especially if those deposits might represent unreported income from business activities. That's exactly what I was thinking. In fact, I believe I'll be contacting their Human Resources Department first thing tomorrow morning. Perfect. While federal investigators built their case methodically, Veronica's own husband would attack from the inside. Her marriage, her career, and her freedom were all about to disappear simultaneously. She'd told me I'd never make it to the top, but she'd forgotten that sometimes the most devastating attacks come from below. Tuesday morning arrived with October rain streaking the windows of my apartment. I made coffee and checked the news on my phone, waiting for the first domino to fall. It happened at 9:47 a.m. A text from my former colleague Jessica. Holy shit, Logan. Veronica's husband is in the office with HR and the partners. What the hell is going on? I poured a second cup of coffee and opened my laptop. From my kitchen table, I watched 7 years of careful planning reach its conclusion. Marcus Hale wasn't just any divorce attorney. He was a former federal prosecutor who specialized in complex financial cases. When he discovered his wife's affair, he'd done what any good lawyer would do. He'd started digging. What he'd found in their joint accounts would have been enough to destroy her career by itself. Unexplained deposits totaling nearly $200,000 over the past 18 months. Money that clearly represented unreported income from her kickback scheme. But Marcus had gone further. Using his divorce proceedings as legal cover, he'd subpoenaed Veronica's banking records, her email accounts, and her business communications. Everything I'd provided to federal investigators, he was now presenting directly to North Peak's senior management. The beauty of the situation was its legal elegance. Marcus wasn't trying to harm his wife's career. He was simply trying to determine her true net worth for asset division purposes. The fact that his investigation would expose massive securities fraud was just an unfortunate side effect. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. Partners called emergency meeting. Veronica looked like she was going to throw up. I walked to my window and looked down at the street. Somewhere across town, Veronica was sitting in a conference room watching her life disintegrate in real time. Her husband presenting evidence of her fraud. Her affair with Whitmore exposed to the entire partnership. Her carefully constructed image crumbling under the weight of documentation she couldn't deny or explain. At 11:30 a.m., Jessica called me directly. Logan, you're not going to believe this. They just escorted Veronica out of the building. Security took her computer, her files, everything. Word is they're suspending her pending a full investigation. That's terrible, I said, trying to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. There's more. Whitmore's been placed on administrative leave too. Apparently his wife found out about the affair and she's threatening to divorce him. The partners are freaking out about the optics. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while Jessica continued with the gossip. How Veronica had tried to claim she was being set up. How she'd demanded to speak with the other partners privately. How she'd finally broken down crying when they'd told her she was being terminated effective immediately. After I hung up with Jessica, I called the SEC enforcement officer who'd been assigned to my case. Agent Peterson, this is Logan Pierce. I wanted to let you know that the subject of my complaint was just terminated from her employment. You may want to expedite your investigation before she has a chance to destroy any remaining evidence. We're already on it, Mr. Pierce. Based on your documentation, we've obtained a court order to freeze her assets and preserve all relevant records. We'll be conducting interviews with her former colleagues this week. And her cooperation with the investigation? Let's just say her attorney is recommending full disclosure in exchange for leniency. We expect to have a complete picture of the scheme within 30 days. I hung up and poured a third cup of coffee. Outside, the rain had stopped and patches of blue sky were breaking through the clouds. Veronica had been right about one thing. I'd never make it to the top at North Peak Financial, but I'd never wanted that kind of success anyway. The final act played out exactly as I'd choreographed it. Wednesday morning, the Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story about securities fraud at a prominent Manhattan investment firm. They didn't name Veronica specifically, but anyone in the industry would recognize the details. The Delaware Shell Company, the kickback scheme, the systematic exploitation of high-net-worth clients. By noon, the story had been picked up by Bloomberg, CNBC, and the Financial Times. North Peak's stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading. The partners issued a statement promising full cooperation with federal investigators and announcing the immediate termination of all employees involved in the scheme. Thursday brought the SEC's formal charges: 8 counts of securities fraud, 2 counts of investment advisor fraud, 1 count of money laundering. The complaint was devastating in its specificity, laying out exactly how Veronica had stolen from her clients and enriched herself through systematic deception. Her arrest Friday morning was almost anticlimactic. I watched the news coverage from a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far enough from Manhattan to avoid any chance of running into former colleagues. The footage showed her walking into federal court in handcuffs, her expensive suit wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair disheveled. The divorce proceedings moved with similar efficiency. Marcus Hale had built his career destroying people in courtroom combat. Applying those skills to his own wife was almost artistic in its thoroughness. The prenuptial agreement they'd signed had a morality clause that voided all of Veronica's claims to marital assets in case of adultery. Combined with the criminal charges, she would walk away from the marriage with nothing. The professional consequences followed quickly. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority barred her from the securities industry for life. Her professional licenses were revoked. Her name was added to multiple industry databases that would prevent her from ever working in finance again. But the personal destruction was equally complete. The affair with Whitmore had been reported in the gossip columns. Her parents, old money Connecticut socialites, had released a statement disavowing her actions and expressing their shame. Her former friends and colleagues avoided her calls. She'd become toxic in every social and professional circle that had once welcomed her. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room in Portland, Oregon, signing an employment agreement with Brightfin Renewable Capital. They'd offered me a senior position managing their clean energy investment portfolio. Better pay, better title, better people. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Veronica had been climbing a ladder built on fraud and betrayal, I'd been building a reputation for integrity that followed me across the country. The partners at Brightfin had specifically recruited me after hearing about my role in exposing the North Peak scandal. Your references were unanimous, the managing partner had told me during my final interview. They said you were someone who always did the right thing, even when it was difficult. I'd accepted the offer without mentioning that doing the right thing had also involved a carefully orchestrated campaign of professional destruction. Some truths were better left unspoken. My last week in New York, I had lunch with Marcus Hale. He'd insisted on thanking me personally for exposing his wife's crimes. The divorce had been finalized, and he was already engaged to a federal judge he'd met at a legal conference. She tried to blame you, you know, he said over appetizers. Claimed you'd set her up because you were jealous of her success. And what did you tell her? That successful people don't usually end up in federal prison. We both laughed. Veronica had been sentenced to 4 years in federal custody, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She'd also been ordered to pay full restitution to her victims, a sum that would keep her in debt for the rest of her life. The money she'd stolen was gone, spent on luxury items and high-end living. The clients she'd defrauded were pursuing civil suits that would claim any remaining assets. She would emerge from prison with nothing. No career, no family, no friends, no future in the industry that had once seemed to promise her everything. Meanwhile, James Whitmore had been forced to resign from North Peak in disgrace. His wife had taken half his assets and his reputation in their divorce. He'd been forced to sell their Hampton house and move to a modest apartment in Queens. The other partners had made it clear he would never work in finance again. As I sat in that Portland conference room signing papers that would define the next chapter of my career, I thought about what Veronica had told me that day in the North Peak conference room. You'll never make it to the top. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but maybe not about that. The top, as she'd defined it, required compromises I wasn't willing to make. It demanded a willingness to step on other people that I'd never possessed. It meant becoming someone I didn't want to be. I never had to push her off the ladder. She climbed it with broken rungs, and eventually gravity had done the rest.